Good morning, my dear friends. It's Immanuel here. How you doing? Thank you for joining me. Today I have a video for you. Today is the 31st of December. As you know, it's the last day of 2025. I wish you all a wonderful 2026. If you have celebrations going on this evening, have a great time. Okay? Enjoy what you have in your life. It's a beautiful thing. Be grateful. Today I have a video for you which I would like to comment on. There's a gentleman called Paul Warburg, probably an American. I don't know what's his background, but let's see what he's saying about this, and I'm going to give you my honest
A
thoughts.
lot. What I'm referring to is some new drone footage that Ukraine has put out showing a drone flying over their new fortifications. And this video is extremely long, showing that the fortifications aren't just one small spot, but they just go on and on and on and on for many, many kilometers, making up most of the territory behind the current front lines where Russia and Ukraine are fighting. Now, the value of fortifications like this probably seems pretty obvious, but it turns out that these fortifications are far more significant than most people realize. And that's probably why Ukraine chose to release these videos, because these fortifications are not just a statement about Ukraine's additional military capability that Russia would have to push through, but it actually turns out that the nature of the fortifications and how impenetrable they actually are doesn't just make a statement.
No fortifications are impenetrable. We have seen that some of the most fortified areas from Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Pokrovsk, they all fall. Okay, it's all about time, strategy, tactics, and the weaponry that you're able to use. I know that these kind of fortifications look very big and very complex and very impenetrable, but actually, let's be real. If I were to drop an FAB 500 or a FAB 1500 or a FAB 3000, which is the 3-ton Russian glide bomb on this area, it would not only dissipate this whole thing, it would destroy all the minefields all around it because of the overpressure, heat, the vibration in the grounds. 2, 3 airstrikes with such massive weapons would create a breach so big it would be very difficult to stop infantry from passing through. Okay, these are not that difficult, Paul. Uh, but yes, you don't know that. That's the problem. A lot of such commentators do not understand military tactics, military weaponry, as well as maybe I do. Okay.
Statement about Ukraine's military capabilities. It also makes a statement of confidence about how the war will ultimately end. Today's video is made possible by my sponsor, Crack. Up to this point in the war, Russia has already found themselves broken against several different Ukrainian fortress cities. Whether we're talking about
Broken. I don't understand what does that mean. Broken. Okay, let's continue.
Bakhmut, Avdiivka, currently Pokrovsk, and they all share the same characteristic. Russia was eventually able to take them. They haven't taken Pokrovsk yet, but presumably maybe they will over time. But they were only able to do so at the cost of literally hundreds of thousands of casualties.
So far, confirmed KIA as per Mediazona, which is the only resource that has been counting Russian losses since the beginning of the war, more or less accurately or reliably, is 135,000, maybe, to 150,000. So I don't know where you get the idea that hundreds of thousands were expensed just to take Bakhmut, or we know from Prigozhin's statements that during Bakhmut they had 10,000 KIA and about another 10 to 20,000 wounded. Okay, Ukraine in the same case for Bakhmut had almost almost 5 times more KIA, and that's a fact. Okay, it's a charade. Anybody who tells you that Ukraine is having less losses than Russia is just coping. This war, my dear friends, opened with cruise missile strikes and ballistic missile strikes, which were very accurate. Since day one, the Russians have been using far more weaponry. Okay, on a day-to-day basis, they use 10 to 15,000 shells of M155 rounds. They use 5 times more FPV drones. They have 8 times more kamikaze drones. They use about 3 to 5,000 airstrikes per month, which accounts to around 150 to 200 glide bomb precise strikes in a day. So there is no math where Ukraine is suffering less casualties. Okay, if the Russians have, I don't know, 1 million casualties, like the Western narrative keeps claiming, then then the Ukrainians have at the very least 1 million casualties as well, because there is no way you can account for 15 times more firepower. It's you would have to be childish. You would have to be extremely naive to believe anything coming out of Ukraine, by the way. These were the same people who were claiming, oh, we intercepted everything on day one, and then you would see explosions all over Kiev. This is just a fact. You can go look back every one of those, demographic charts that they keep publishing, Ukrainian side, with the 1 million losses. They apparently have 11,000 tanks destroyed, but Oryx, which is an open resource, they have maybe 4,000 destroyed. And as per Russians' engineering teams, they are able to recover 30% of them, so essentially about 3,000 to 4,000 tanks destroyed. So the Ukrainians are just lying, plainly lying. They are telling you about superiority, which they never had. They never did. They never did. There were maybe 3 days, 3 months during the early phase of FPV drones where they had a small advantage of using FPV drones. But within 3 to 5 months, the Russians had overtaken them in those productions simply because they have a bigger industrial capacity. So these kind of lies. Sorry, Paul, lies. Nobody believes you.
Basically throwing so many bodies at the problem that eventually they overwhelmed Ukraine's ammunition.
Ukraine, 8 rounds of mobilization. Russia, 1 round of mobilization. Big deal. Big difference, folks. Big difference.
And Ukraine's ability to hold those positions. But all those positions also have something else in common. They were under assault essentially from the very early days of the war, meaning Ukraine actually had relatively little time to prepare those positions and hard.
That's not true. That's not true. Pakrovsk was a fortress city. Bakhmut was a fortress city way before the war really started. It's a fact. I mean, I'm sorry. Like, you would have to be a Delulu to believe that Bakhmut was not a fortress city. It's exactly the same cope that we receive, oh, they took Bakhmut. It's not strategically important anyways. You know what I mean?
In those positions, except for under combat circumstances. That meant that these positions were never able to be as dialed in and as locked in as these new Ukrainian fortifications.
These Ukrainian fortifications will be demolished quickly, rather. Like I said, all you need about 4 to 5 glide bombs in a particular pattern, and you're good.
Are not even close to it. But despite that, Ukraine was able to basically, under combat circumstances, create fortifications that were so powerful that Russia had to, again, exert so many casualties.
No, Russia never. No, they're facing, like I said. Have you seen the POV, the POW, and the body exchanges between Ukraine and Russia? Every body and POW exchange has a 1 to 38 almost advantage to the Russians. Okay, I'm not suggesting that Ukrainians are losing 38 for every 1 Russian, but reality is something like 6 KIA on the Ukrainian side for 1 Russian KIA. It's something like this. Paul, sorry, come on now.
To break through,
you gotta be lying,
when we compare
bro.
that then to the new fortifications that Ukraine has built, we realize that Russia has a serious, serious problem.
Russia doesn't have a serious problem. Okay, if Russia has a serious problem, Ukraine has a worse problem. Since the war started, there are at least 5 million Ukrainians who have left Ukraine. They have left Ukraine to go into the European Union. At least 2 to 3 million of them on the other side have gone to Russia. So Russia actually gained population. Ukraine lost a third of its population, or 25% of the population. Okay. Estimates are at least 1 million Ukrainians are KIA. Total casualties could be 1.7 to 1.8 million. Some people claim even as high as 2 million. And these are not, normal people. These are exactly people who are well informed. You have a lot of commentators who are way more well informed than Paul over here, that's for sure.
A lot of people have already done the math, and they've looked at Russia's current rate of advance, and they've talked about how it's literally slower than if a snail were to cross the country of Ukraine. And a lot of people have done the math and have noted that Russia would need literally millions more casualties to achieve their goals.
That's not true. No, that's not true. Russians are losing less people as the time goes on, and that's a fact. Okay, Russians had their highest casualties. Okay, the Russians had their highest casualties during Bakhmut. Okay, see, look, 156,000. Okay. It's not, oh, million casualties. Okay. And if you look at it monthly, right? If you go a bit lower, you will see for yourself exactly what's happening. And what do you see, my friend? What do you see? 2004, 2000, their highest casualties were in Feb 2023, August. They had 1,445 casualties, 49 casualties in August 2024. That's where the highest casualties are. The most casualties, if you look at this, 10, 12 a day, 9 a day, 55 casualties reported between 13 and 19 November, December, 39. Look at this. Okay, even if you add 20% more as missing, MIA, or 30% more, you are nowhere near a million casualties. Maybe the Russians have about 300,000 dead and wounded. There is no math, really. There is really no math where Ukraine is having less casualties than this, okay? There isn't. So, Paul, bro, come on now. What are you on, man?
assuming that the circumstances of today remained the same. And a lot of people have said, well, it's probably more likely that Russia will actually adapt and they'll be able to get through with less casualties. But it turns out that the opposite is actually true. As Ukraine continues to build these fortifications, not only will Russia have to continue the same rate of casualties to make similar gains to what they're making today, but the rate of casualties that Russia will take will almost certainly have to accelerate by many magnitudes if they actually want to achieve their goals militarily.
What are their goals? They have Zaporizhia, Kherson, and two other regions. Yeah. Zaporizhia is about 15 kilometers at this moment from the Russian lines. I'm just saying, and who said Russia has time to lose? I mean, Russia will continue this at its own pace. Everybody's saying, oh, it will take them 3 years, 10 years to get to whatever they're going. Okay, it takes them 10 years. Can Ukraine survive for 10 years? No, I don't think so. Who will fight? When you have everybody 20 to 60 mobilized in Ukraine already, who are you going to mobilize to fight for another 10 years? Paul, my bro, either you need to go back to some sort of math school and do some mathematics, or but okay, Americans not really strong in maths these days. You know what I mean?
To understand why this is the case, it really helps to look at these fortifications specifically. I've already looked at the specifications.
I already said it. These are not a major challenge. A couple of glide bombs would disintegrate huge sections of them, enough for infantry to get along and engineers to pass along and create, um, bridges if necessary. This does not mean it's an easy task, my friends. I never said that. I said this can be done, and they have done it. They have broken through many of such fortifications. Maybe not as advanced as these, but okay, they'll find a solution.
And how wide they are, and talked about the fact that they exist basically behind most of the current front lines in Ukraine. But it turns out that the specifics of these fortifications are even more deadly for Russia, because the purpose of the fortifications isn't for Russia to ever actually go and attack the fortifications head on. The fortifications are essentially impossible for Russia to achieve anything by doing that. And so
How they attack them will depend on the tactical situation, but the Russians are very good at slipping through the cracks and flanks and showing up where you least expect it. That's been the case.
the purpose of the fortifications is actually to funnel the Russian military into more predictable zones of combat, zones where Ukraine.
Well, essentially, Ukraine has done what the Russians already did in 2022. They built lines. Russians already built thousands and thousands of kilometers of exactly these kind of fortifications. And Ukraine has done the same, more or less. It's nothing new. It's not groundbreaking. This is just combat. And the Russians will find a way. I'm pretty sure of it.
Is already well prepared and will just do many multiples of what they've been able to do.
Because the Russians, apparently, in my opinion, since the last 4 years, are just very good at practically demolishing such predictions. Oh, their economy is collapsing. But really? Really? 4% GDP last year. Close to 1% this year. Essentially the same as Germany, by the way. Germany, Britain, take your pick. There is no math.